I would like to introduce our first speaker, Xabier. So if you could please join me in welcoming Xabier to the stage, that would be great.
Hi, hello everyone. Yeah.
Hop on up.
Thank you, Nikki. And hello everyone. And welcome to, well, those of you who are not from Amsterdam, welcome to this beautiful, beautiful city, where they say that that you can experience all 4 seasons of weather in one day. It can get actually pretty crazy. So I think today we are pretty lucky to have at least sun, if nothing else. I was thinking that something else that changes pretty much, or that has changed as much as the weather can change in Amsterdam, is actually the insights industry, right? And with that, with that introduction, I wanted to talk about in a reality, in a landscape that has changed so dramatically, so substantially, that continues to change, that has the challenges of constant technological innovation and other types of disruptions that we may not foresee, how a company dedicated to the production of insights can basically remain, if nothing else, with the same level of turnover as over time. So I would like to go back a little bit in time and think about how the industry and the world used to look like decades ago. So back in the day, we had a company that, in order to succeed, had basically to follow a clear path ahead, right? The meaning of success was very well defined. A company had to maximize turnover for their stakeholders with limited resources. That is a pretty basic definition of economics. But the road was clear, the road was visible. Players had identifiable products. They were producing something that was oftentimes tangible, and the landscape, the arena was pretty identified, and industries were relatively well established. So in order to successfully walk this path, they needed to get ahead of the competition and basically, struggle and get there. So they would hire the services of a research firm in order to facilitate that and to acquire the skills and to acquire the gear to walk that path as successfully as possible. So research would highlight those required tools to aid walking and eventually succeed. They would bring back to their client, usually a presentation, a set of descriptives that would describe what the audience wanted, what they liked, what they were thinking, and they would highlight findings and patterns within the data that they had acquired. And they would basically, give a set of recommendations, and that was sufficient for that company to eventually apply those findings. So application was relatively straightforward. Because they knew the landscape, they already had the gear to walk this path in order to succeed. The application of findings was fairly straightforward, and what they had to do was to focus on the execution of this new strategy. Now, this was a while back. What do we have today? Today we have a very, very different landscape, a very different reality. I think that today's path is oftentimes not only windier, not only less clear, but sometimes it doesn't even exist. Companies may produce something that has never been done before, and the path ahead may be very, very hard to find. There is also this element of long-term uncertainty. And actually, I would even argue that the certainty is becoming shorter and shorter term, because we have a plethora of items that can disrupt that path, that journey at any given moment. So we have this idea of constant disruptions and a strong but unknown technological impact. So to give an idea, in the past, perhaps the job titles that people would have were relatively straightforward, right? That is not the case today. To describe what one person is doing, you have this whole very colorful way of describing one's role. To give another idea, the International Standard Industrial Classification, when it was created by the UN back in 1947, well, they developed the first classification in 48, was composed of about 150 items, line items, to describe the industry at that moment in time. Now, this has been reviewed over time, and in the last edition, in 2006, it was composed by well over 700 items. Now, I cannot forecast the future, but the pattern, the path, seems to be of increasing complexity rather than decreasing complexity. This is just an idea of the landscape that companies encounter nowadays. So what happens if we go with the same type of job description as in the past? What happens if we deliver, or if we simply look at an opinion in one moment in time and simply present that? How are we aiding, how are we helping companies to walk that path that is increasingly more important? If we stop at recommendations, or if we have projects that take months to complete on a reality that may change daily. Now, what we encounter, what we have, is basically a situation in which the application is unclear and our client feels just equally lost. The client still hasn't acquired the necessary elements to future-proof the company. Because at the end of the day, we have a changing landscape. We have threats that may not even be foreseeable or easily foreseeable, and an evolution of the market that is fairly unclear, and where the company needs to continue to build up that resilience, that flexibility, that agility to react to all this. Just to give you an idea, only in the last 10 years, the number of estimated companies worldwide has ballooned to over 300 million in the world. The arena where all these companies are competing is way wider. To give you another idea, the technological disruption that we see today has also changed quite substantially. It took 100 years for the telephone to basically acquire mass adoption. Moving a little bit further, it took just 50 years for the television to acquire mass adoption. And we just saw a few months ago that it took 5 days to ChatGPT to get their first 1 million users. 5 days. So it is a level of disruption that is very hard to see. So what happens when the client remains lost even after trying to figure out where the path lies? We have a client that starts questioning the return on investment on that project. We have a company that remains lost and that it was not able to future-proof the business. At the end of the day, a company, what they want is to survive, right, and to continue to create business over time. And there is like a level of mismatch between what the client was expecting and what the ultimate delivery was. So, if we combine this situation with a reality in which, for example, the application of technology is becoming cheaper, if it is easier for the client also to basically purchase or buy some of the services, what happens is that they are finding it easier to internalize the function within, or do it by themselves, internalize the function within the company. And this is what we saw in our latest edition of the Users and Buyers Global Insight Study back in 2021. I know this is a couple of years back. We are, as we speak, working on our 2023 edition, so I would invite you to remain tuned for the next few weeks until we publish the new results. But what we saw was that actually projects conducted internally were growing over time. This is this idea of the democratization or the progressive democratization of elements and parts of the insights function. Still, with that, what we see is that the industry is growing at a fairly good speed, a fairly good path. In our global market research report of 2022, the last edition available, we look at the growth of the industry in the latest available fiscal year, which of course had elapsed in 2021. And we saw that the industry had grown a good 10%. So there is also this counterintuitive thing of, if we see that clients are slashing their budgets, or that there is like a challenge to generate business, how come the industry is growing at these levels? And what we see is that the set of companies that are present and that are directly and sometimes indirectly competing against each other is way wider. We have a very broad set of companies that we may not immediately identify as competitors that actually have become part of the competition. So we have a larger playing field. Now, this may look a little bit gloomy, but let's see what we can expect for the years ahead. Before that, I would like to also point or to talk about this idea of the accessibility of insights. We also saw in our Global Prices study of 2021, the latest edition again, we are now publishing the 2023 of this biannual study, how the human element of research was getting a bit more expensive. We see this median of prices globally for a UNA study, how the methods of face-to-face and CATI were getting increasingly expensive, and I believe that is also in part due to them becoming over time or progressively less common. But the most common mode would be the online, which has kept a consistently comparatively lower price. So what happens if you want to increase the turnover of your company by using a method that is over time becoming cheaper? You need to either create or secure more and more projects, but that may not be organically viable. You cannot constantly get more and more projects. So how do we keep up with, or how do we sustain a certain level of turnover? And this is eventually the whole point. So let's look at the next few years. What I would argue, and what I would like to submit, is that we have already seen pretty much with the so-called democratization of the data collection function. Nowadays, getting data is something fairly trivial, even for many, at least for many methods. Clients themselves acquire a growing amount and mass of data as well. So it is fairly easy to reach this part of the data collection. Data analysis now is in process of being democratized. It has started, but it's a bit more complex. But the last bastion of democratization is this area of reporting. It is the area that, of course, involves a much stronger component of the human element, much more creativity, and it involves a much more nuanced understanding of the problem at hand. So what I would like to submit is that if data collection as a component of the bill of the research projects is losing importance, the data analysis is now a part of it. What we would have to focus is precisely on the reporting side and on providing a higher level of advisory, of consultancy services to companies to help them future-proof their business in this level of of high uncertainty. So with that, we need to provide the tools for companies to be able to guard themselves against the disruption of technologies, or to be ready when customer trends suddenly change over in 24 hours just because a TikTok trend suddenly began out of nowhere, or to be ready when any other type of unknown threats may pop up, or when the next disruption in this financial environment that is so volatile would show other types of disruption. Now, how do we do that? I think part of the mindset that would change for that is when producing insights, always to think about what is the consequence of this. It is basically to think of, therefore. I see that clients think, or clients have this trend, or that your customer base or your intended audience thinks about this. Okay, that's fine. Therefore, you may need to perhaps change the marketing department, or to reshift their priorities, or to, what is the consequence of that? Let's not stop here, but stop there. What is the consequence of everything we do? And I think this is the element that will give clients a more or a higher perception of value, and actually value, and that will allow us to also basically, to put it bluntly, charge that in the invoice. So in the past, in the invoice yesterday, as I mentioned before, had an element where the cost of fieldwork was a big part of the final invoice. If tomorrow's fieldwork is not contributing to the cost, it's also not contributing to the added value of the invoice. So this is the challenge, right? How do we deal with an invoice that is with elements that are shrinking over time? And this is the idea that I'm trying to make, that I'm submitting to you, that I think the answer lies in the reporting side. That while some elements may be shrinking, this element of added value, the reporting side, is what will allow us not only to keep the same level, but even perhaps to expand the invoice. And eventually, of course, to increase the resulting turnover and revenue and protect the company. Now, this is just extracting some information from some of the reports that we create at ESOMAR. From my side, I will continue to look at the industry to see where things may be going, and of course, to work to keeping everybody informed. As Nikki, thank you so much, said, we are at the exhibition, so I will be there up for a chat, or if you have any question, happy to answer.
So a lot of you joiners, come on in. For those of you who have been here from the beginning, or maybe from the first couple of minutes onward, does anyone have a question for Xabier? I'm looking in the app and I don't see any, but if anyone wants to raise their hand. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, I love that chart that you did with the extra reporting on. That sounded really interesting. And I wonder that one. Yes, okay. That one. And I wonder what kind of evidence or trends that you've seen that lead you to to make that assumption there. Yeah. I'd love to hear more. Thank you.
Yeah. So there was an element of intuition, of seeing exactly that the price of developing certain or of some of the methodologies was actually falling, and that the methodologies that were becoming the cheapest ones were actually the online methodologies that were becoming also the most prevalent. So it is this element of an element of focusing perhaps too much on methodologies rather than on analysis, which is of course very important on some areas. In terms of quality of data, in terms of that is crucial, of course. But in terms of hard money, basically, it has that impact. And I think it is important to perhaps warn about that. We also saw that, I know that in many cases, even the reporting aspect, companies would develop or would take a lot of effort into collecting the data, analyzing it, but oftentimes the reporting side would be even given for free. Would be just a delivery, a PowerPoint, sitting down with the client, 30 minutes, good luck with with this, and now it's all yours. And I think it's stopping perhaps a bit short of that next step.
One more question for Xabi, and then we're going to move on.
Hi. Again, like you, Fiona, I thought that right-hand side is very, very interesting. I'm curious to know, as you think about the implications for skills and capabilities, because you're moving from scientists, us being scientists, to us being maybe strategists, storytellers. What's your perspective on what it means for skills and capabilities?
For skills and capabilities, all right. So this reminds me a little bit of a question that popped up at Congress as well. I think there is room to develop some skills that allow researchers and data scientists to be a bit more generalists. And what I think is that there is a combination. There is a combination of data scientists to learn the nuance, how to read the story, how to extract what the data is really telling you, and become a bit more market researchers, but also market researchers to not necessarily learn, but be aware and understand the possibilities and limitations of technology. So what I jokingly mentioned in September was that the market researchers should be able to tell the BS from some of these technologies, to know what they can, but also what they cannot do. Yeah.
Thank you, Xabi. So if you can all join me in thanking Xabi for this great presentation.